Here's Manny Guerra with longtime Worcester resident, former Worcester police officer and photographic artist, Mr. William Bill Gardiner.
This is all about me. This is all about you. So we're keeping it personal. We're keeping it personal.
But got to Worcester, the Worcester PD, and in the academy, it became clear immediately that I didn't fit in and I didn't belong. Because guys around me were always trying to solve problems with their fists and with brute force and bending the law, even in the academy. And I was always, oh, no, you can't quite do that. And there would always be controversy. You know how after an exam, you meet in the locker room or down the hall or in the cafeteria. Would you get a number 2? Would you get a number 17? Yeah. So we would do that constantly. And people would, oh, yeah, well, we can make that arrest. And, even without a warrant, we can make. I'm like, no, actually, you can't. If we have a warrant for Manny's arrest, but Manny's in Gary's house,
right?
Unless we have fresh and continued pursuit, we chase you and you run into Gary's house, we can go in after you. Or if we get to the door knowing you're in there and we hear something emergent like, I'm going to kill you, we can kick the door and go in. If we find you, we can arrest you. Short of that, you have to get a warrant. So you have to contact a judge, surround the house so the person doesn't get away, wait for the judge to honor a warrant, an entry warrant for that house, and then you can go in. Okay. You don't know what you're talking about. We're the effing police. We can do anything we want to do.
Wow.
And of course, when the exams came back, I was one of the only people, if not the only person, to get the question right. And there was one particular exam, which I won't even get into, but long story short, there was a piece of the fact pattern that was missing. And it was back in the day, and some older folks will remember the Duquesne machine. It was like a mimeograph machine. And you typed your test onto a piece of paper. Under the paper was an onion skin. Under that was a purple piece of ink paper. And then that would print onto the white sheet that would be put into the Duquesne. Well, the pages evidently crisscrossed, so there was a section of the fact pattern gone. And we were supposed to make a determination as to whether the crime was a felony, whether we could arrest or not, and several other things. So there were like 5 different prongs. And I read it, and I'm sitting there in my cruiser. I come upon a truck broken into at night, after midnight, so it was nighttime, and VCRs and stereos spilled out the back. And then all of a sudden, I'm driving through the neighborhood, and I see 2 guys, one carrying a VCR. Long story short, the VCR did come from that truck. So is it a felony? Do I have the power to arrest? Well, I didn't, because short of, seeing that person in the truck out and then walking down the way, he's receiving stolen property at a minimum. And that's it. And the other guy, nothing, because he didn't have anything in his hands at all.
Gotcha.
And so
that's fair. I mean, that's
right. Exactly.
Yeah, that sounds fair.
And I wrote that. I literally rewrote I wrote all of that information into the border of the paper, the margins of the paper.
Right. So it's clear.
So it was clear, right? Exactly why I made the decision I did. And the sergeant, when he got to that question, says, "We were going to throw this question out, but one cadet realized that there was something wrong with the fact pattern, and so we kept it in." And that cadet was Billy Gardiner.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, from the back of the room, you heard "effing know-it-all."
Wow.
Yeah. So it started in the academy and went downhill from there. By the time we graduated, there were so many cops in the street who had heard that I wasn't a go-along to get-along guy, and that I did things by the book.
Rookie class, you started, oh man.
Yep, exactly. So there were cops in the street who hated me, didn't want to work with me, and it just went downhill from there.
Because you know what you were talking about.
Yeah, knew what I was talking about, and I didn't break the law, and I didn't like to step on people's necks. I didn't think that was fair or appropriate. So,
well, we needed you.
So I'm on the job. I started out working in the cell room. We all end up starting working in the cell room. Then I got out on patrol. Half of our class, we were the biggest class in the history of the department. We started out with 62 cadets and ended up graduating 53. And so we got split up. Half went to midnights, and the other half went to what we call first half. First half and last half is on either side of midnight, and then the day shift. So I got to go first half because of where I graduated, my rank in the class. And I did patrol probably for about 2 years, a little over 2 years. And I had, when I was at WPI, had gotten involved with a domestic violence group, and they did conferences every year at Worcester State at the time, where doctors, medical professionals, law enforcement, medical professionals, teachers, religious folks, men, and a couple of other organizations would do presentations on juvenile violence from their perspectives.
Okay.
And at the end of the conference, one year was dating violence, and another year was gang violence. So what we did to keep the work going was create these little subgroups from each one of those categories, and we'd meet once a month. So we had a law enforcement group that met at the Worcester County Courthouse.
Okay.
And so, or the Worcester District Courthouse. And I was involved in that for about 2 good years until I went 3 to 11, and the meetings were at 5, so I couldn't go to the meetings anymore. One day I got a newsletter in the mail from the round table, and I saw Mark Roach and Gary Gem's name on it. I'm like, oh, Mark Roach. I met Mark Roach when I was at WPI. He was just an officer.
Okay.
Gary was a lieutenant. Well, the two of them just upped the ladder, like every few years.
Wow.
And Gary eventually became chief, and Mark became a deputy chief. So he's a sergeant now, and involved in the round table. And I, told him, I said, "Hey, Mark, yeah, I was one of the people who helped start that round table."
Yep.
And he's like, "Really? Listen, Gary just got permission to start a domestic violence unit. You want in?" I said, "Yes." And Mark was an amazing, of all the supervisors in the department, in my opinion, he was the best supervisor.
Wow.
He was really laid back, really smart, but let you kind of, go to the end of your leash. Not always just reining you in and telling you what to do and how to do it, kind of let you run and do things. And we had a 4-person team that we had, and Mark was the sergeant, and it was just an amazing time. Well, 6-7 months went by, and we got pulled into another division that we didn't need to be in. And eventually the senior sergeant started, messing around with us and messing around with Mark, and Mark said, "You know what? I don't need this," and he left and went to back to midnights, back to uniform.
Okay.
And that left me with a guy a sergeant who didn't like me at all.
At all, huh?
And within 3 months, I was insubordinate and all these other things. Going,
Wow.
just not doing the job. We got to go back. This interview could go all night. When I first graduated, when any cadet graduates, you get an FTO, a field training officer.
Yep.
And you ride around with that person for a number of, amount of time. Back then it was like, 6 weeks, give or take. It might be longer now. And I had this guy for the first week. The very first call we went on was just up the hill off of Plantation Street. And it was a breaking and entering, a burglary, or a B&E during the daytime.
Yep.
And we went in, and I have my my metal clipboard and my report on it ready to fill things out. And he's like, "Okay, well, show us what's going on." And the guy just led us through the house, and I'm like trying to scratch down. We're moving around the house. I'm just writing down information as best as I can. And all of a sudden, we get back to the front of the house, and he says, "So, you got that?" And I literally had nothing but chicken scratch. I'm like, this was nothing like the academy where we got to sit down, take your time, just write your report nice and eloquently and all that.
Right.
And he's like, "Well, just give him a blank one, have him sign it. Let's go." And we went out into the car, and it happened all week long. Well, he got promoted to sergeant that week, so got him off my back, and then I got hooked up with another FTO that was a really great guy. Okay. And so the last 5 weeks of FTO was perfect. But now, circle back to the domestic violence unit.
Yep.
He becomes the junior sergeant now and in charge of us.
Which one is that?
The sergeant who...
The first one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he didn't like me, and I didn't like him right back, and I was forced out in a couple of months. And so I went on vacation, like I'd been doing for years on Martha's Vineyard. And this was pre-cell phone, too, so I don't know how he did it.
But
right. One of my lieutenants, Lieutenant Lucas, now I'm back in operations again, doing cruiser patrol. Lieutenant caught up with me and said, "Hey, Billy Gardiner, when are you coming back?" I'm, "Well, in a couple of days." "All right, good. There's a couple of positions opened up for bicycle patrol, and I think you'd be perfect for it." And I said, "I think so, too." So came back in a couple of days. You had once it got posted, you had 10 to 14 days to apply.
Oh, okay.
Write a report and apply for it. So I did that and had enough seniority that I got in and was on bicycle patrol for a short period downtown, but then I ended up moving to what we call Route 12, which is much of the Main South area, up and down the Main Street corridor. And I was on duty one day, and there had been an incident at the Worcester Youth Center. which, as you remember, was down in the 500 block of Main Street.
That's right.
And at the incident, and I don't remember all the little details, but there was some kind of disturbance, or at least police were called to the front of the youth center because kids were hanging out, maybe blocking the sidewalk, who knows.
Right.
Nothing violent, nothing, out of control.
Right.
And so the police show up, and the folks inside the youth center saw what was going on. So, well, we need to get out there so that, nobody gets arrested. Well, long story short, the executive director and 2 other staff members go out and end up getting pepper sprayed and arrested.
I remember that.
And now the atmosphere in the department is those effing kids. We hate those kids. We don't like those kids, and those youth center kids and all that. And the youth center was mostly Black and Latino kids. So, take it from there.
Right.
So I'm thinking, you know what? It's just not right, because you used to hear these things all the time, just little side comments here, side comments there. I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go into the youth center and just extend an olive branch and say, hey, not all cops are bad. And I rolled in with my bike one day, brought it on inside, and looking for Adolfo Arastia, who was the executive director at the time. And said, hey, I'm Officer Gardiner, and I'm on the bike patrol, and I'm really interested in the youth center and want to see what I can do to help out. And he gave me a quick tour. I don't think we stopped. Just, this is the DJ booth. This is the rec room. This is the kids' room. And okay, you know what? Why don't you come back another time? And I'm like, all right. So, and I could tell he's pushing me out because he wants to find out who I am and what my story is. And I came back the next day and walked in. He said, you're serious, aren't you? I said, yeah. And he says, all right, feel free to come in anytime. And that's what I did. I tried, as much as it was a drop-in place for kids to drop into, I was dropping in all the time, and usually in uniform.
That's awesome.
And I built up these amazing relationships with these kids, some of them gang involved, and others just, on the wrong side of the tracks. And built really amazing relationships with them. And that was around July of 97, and by October of 97, I was invited to become a member of the board of directors.
I remember that.
Exactly.
Hey, shout out to Adolfo Arastia.
Yep.
Shout out to the Worcester Youth Center. Hey, shout out to Lynn Simons, too.
Yes.
I remember Lynn.
Yep, she was very integral in getting the youth center started.
Absolutely. And Sean Harris. Shout out to Sean Harris and the whole crew back in the day that was part of that.
Yep, exactly.
And
so that's where I met you.
That's all
in the youth center. Because if I do the math right, we're about 10 years apart. So I was 20. I was 31 at the time. So you were about 21.
Yeah,
give or take.
I remember those days. Those are some good days.
I know, right?
Worcester Youth Center, Mr. Adolfo.
Enough respect, man. Enough love, man.
Arastia, it's Big Man Domingo.
We love you.
Well, I totally remember you being involved in the youth center, and it was, it wasn't something that was the norm for a police officer to want to work with young people that are involved in gangs and or anyone of color, whatsoever. And it was a time and a place that really it wasn't welcome downtown. Let's just say it that way.
Sure.
Where the location was. So for you to come in was big. That was big and huge, and to keep coming back was even bigger.
Sure.
And you said you built relationships. Let's talk about some of those.
Yeah. Well, I was on the board of directors there for 4 years, and then got invited to become a member of the board of directors of UINC, Youth Opportunities Upheld Incorporated. So I figured it was time to make a little shift.
Yep.
And but during the time there, we had an amazing board of directors. Alan Fletcher, a very, very common name here in Worcester, very affluent, had been involved in Worcester Magazine and other things, and he had a very, deep heart for kids in that position, and so he was our board president.
He was my mentor.
Yeah, there you go.
On the board of directors,
Yep, and we had a whole bunch of other people, Kathy Conrecht from UMass, and
Mama.
Doug
Mama.
Cutler from Cutler Management. All those folks, and then kids like you were probably a youth leader at the time, and not necessarily one of the drop-in kids. But there you go. But just built a lot of relationships. And to be honest with you, it's been so long. There are a lot of names that are gone. There was a a Yesenia, I remember, and there was a kid named Red. I don't remember his real name,
Red.
but his nickname was Red.
Yeah, Red.
I remember Red. And
Shout out to Red.
Yeah, Shay, there you go. Wherever you are today, brother.
Yeah, he's a barber. He's still doing
Oh, is
stuff.
he really? Is he a barber now? Okay, cool. Yeah. So, but yeah, I had great relationships with them, and we helped the youth center get a more permanent space around the corner on Lower Chandler Street.
Yep.
And eventually, after I had left, they moved up to Upper Chandler Street, where they are to this day.
That's right. I worked at all three places.
There you go.
Yeah. And when my interview comes around, that'll be an interesting story.
There you go.